All right, strap in, everybody. Today we are going deep, deep into Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
A classic.
Oh, yeah. You've probably heard of it.
Ditto.
Maybe even read it, skimmed it. But the idea with this deep dive is, so many people have touched on it, so many people have talked about it,
Right.
that we really want to get to the gems. We're talking the aha moments.
Absolutely.
Those things that shift your thinking. So think of it as we're going like beyond the surface level. We're trying to extract those actionable insights that can really stick with you.
And what's interesting about Covey is that it's not a quick fix kind of a thing. It's really a framework for thinking about effectiveness. And it all starts with how we see the world, our paradigms.
Okay, paradigms.
Yeah.
So I get that they're important, but can you explain it? Like I'm trying to navigate Chicago with a Detroit map.
Yeah, well, that's a great analogy. As a matter of fact, Covey uses that very analogy. You see, having the wrong map, it just leads to frustration, no matter how much effort you put in. So his point is, so often we try to solve the wrong problems, or we apply solutions in the wrong context because our underlying assumptions, our paradigms are flawed.
Mhm.
You're trying to force a square peg into a round hole.
Okay. So how do we know if we have the wrong map?
That's a good question.
What's like the sign that we need a paradigm shift?
Well, he talks about this thing, the character ethic versus the personality ethic.
Okay.
And so the character ethic is all about those deep, inner principles, integrity, humility, continuous learning. The personality ethic is focused on kind of surface level techniques and quick fixes. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone.
Mhm.
So he's saying that for lasting success, for genuine effectiveness, you got to cultivate those inner principles.
So it's not just about like projecting a certain image or
Yeah.
like, having the right techniques. It's really about like the inner game.
Yeah, it's almost like you can't fake a harvest. You can't skip the slow, natural process of growth and just expect to have a bountiful crop.
Right.
You got to nurture the roots, that inner foundation, to really get results.
That makes a lot of sense. So how does this tie into effectiveness? Like when he talks about effectiveness, is he talking about, success in our careers or our relationships, or is it something bigger?
Well, it's interesting because he talks about this maturity continuum, and it's a progression. It goes from dependence to independence to interdependence.
Mhm.
And here's the key takeaway. He says, while independence is great, it's not the end game. True effectiveness, the kind that allows us to achieve extraordinary things, it lies in interdependence.
Hold on. So you're saying like even being a strong, independent person, that's not the ultimate goal. There's something beyond that.
Well, think about it this way. You might be able to survive on your own, build your own shelter, hunt for your own food, but imagine trying to build a skyscraper by yourself or send someone to the moon. It's not possible.
Right.
Some goals require us to tap into the power of collaboration, to leverage the strengths of others, and to recognize that we are all interconnected.
I never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
That's a pretty mind-blowing concept. So where do we start on this journey toward interdependence?
Well, he would say it starts with understanding where you currently fall on that maturity continuum. What kind of relationships are you building? Are you still overly reliant on others for validation, for support? Or are you fiercely independent but struggling to collaborate?
Right.
Or are you starting to see the power of synergy?
Okay, so this is getting really interesting. So we've talked about paradigms, the importance of character ethic. What else is crucial for building this like foundation for effectiveness?
Well, one of the most impactful concepts he talks about is something called the PPC balance.
Okay.
And he uses this analogy of a goose that lays golden eggs.
I've heard this.
Yeah.
No.
So the golden eggs, they represent our desired outcomes, the production, the results that we're after. And the goose itself represents our production capability, the skills, the resources, the relationships that enable us to achieve those outcomes.
So if we just focus on getting the golden eggs, right, like the short-term results, and we don't take care of the goose, what happens?
Well, exactly. He uses this example of a restaurant owner who waters down his famous clam chowder to increase profits in the short term. Yeah, he makes more money initially. But what happens? Customers wise up, trust erodes,
Right.
and eventually the business crumbles. It's this classic example of sacrificing long-term capability for fleeting gains.
That's a tough lesson.
It is.
So how do we make sure we're not killing the goose that lays the golden eggs in our own lives? How do we strike that balance?
It's about recognizing that investing in our skills, nurturing our relationships, and taking care of our physical and mental well-being, they're not just nice to haves, they're essential for sustained success.
Okay.
So it's about making sure that we're not burning ourselves out, neglecting our loved ones, or cutting corners in ways that will ultimately sabotage our future.
I'm starting to see how this all ties together. We need to start with the right paradigms, cultivate that character ethic. We need to understand that real effectiveness comes from interdependence, not just independence.
Yeah.
And we can't neglect the long-term health of our goose, those capabilities that allow us to achieve lasting success.
You got it. And these are just the foundational principles. We haven't even gotten to the 7 habits themselves yet.
Oh, okay. I am hooked.
All right,
So let's dive into habit 1.
let's do it. And we are back, ready to dive into the first few habits from Covey's powerful framework.
All right. Hit me with habit 1. I'm ready to become a productivity powerhouse.
Well, hold on. It's not just about, becoming a task-crushing machine. Habit 1 is be proactive. And it's less about doing more and more about shifting your mindset from reactive to proactive.
Okay, proactive. I feel like I hear that term thrown around a lot. But what does it actually mean in this context?
Yeah, it's about taking ownership of your life. Recognizing that you have the power to choose your response to any situation. Covey emphasizes focusing on your circle of influence, the things that you can actually control, rather than dwelling on your circle of concern, which is full of things you can't.
Okay, so
Yeah.
give me an example. Sometimes I feel like, I don't know, I'm drowning in to-dos and external pressures and deadlines.
Right.
And it's like, where's the control in that?
Well, think about it this way. You can't control the weather, right? But you can choose to carry an umbrella. You can't control traffic, but you can choose to leave earlier to avoid the rush. It's about focusing on those things that you can impact no matter how small they are, and taking responsibility for your choices.
So it's not about becoming superhuman. It's more about making conscious choices,
Yeah.
even in situations that feel like they're out of our control.
Exactly. He even shares the story of Viktor Frankl,
Oh.
a psychologist who endured the horrors of a concentration camp. And even in that situation, Frankl found a way to choose his response, to find meaning and purpose in his experience.
Wow. That's a powerful example of proactivity. But let's be real. Most of us aren't facing those kinds of extreme situations. So how does this apply to, everyday life?
It's the little things, like instead of hitting the snooze button 5 times, set one alarm and commit to getting up when it goes off.
Right.
Instead of complaining about a messy house, set a timer for 15 minutes and just tidy up one area. It's about those small, conscious choices that align with your values and goals.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this proactive mindset can really make a difference. So what's next on the path to effectiveness?
Well, habit 2 is begin with the end in mind.
Okay.
This one's all about having a clear vision for your life. Imagine you're building a house. Would you just start laying bricks without a blueprint?
No. I mean, that sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. He says you gotta have that mental blueprint for your life. What are your core values? What legacy do you want to leave behind?
Right.
What does success actually mean to you? Once you have that clear vision, it's so much easier to make choices that are aligned with it.
So it's not just about setting goals. It's about defining what we really want our lives to stand for.
Exactly. It's about making sure that you're moving in the right direction, not just being busy for the sake of being busy.
Okay. So how do we translate that big vision into actionable steps? How do we actually start moving towards it?
Well, that's where habit 3 comes in. Put first things first. This one's all about prioritizing effectively, making sure you're dedicating your time and energy to what truly matters. And he introduces this really cool tool called the time management matrix, which helps you categorize tasks based on their urgency and importance.
Okay, break this down for me. I'm a visual learner.
So imagine a grid with 4 quadrants.
Okay.
Quadrant 1 is for things that are both urgent and important, so like crises or deadlines.
Right.
Quadrant 2 is for things that are important but not urgent, so like planning, relationship building, personal development. Quadrant 3 is for things that are urgent but not important, like interruptions, unnecessary meetings, other people's priorities.
Okay.
And then quadrant 4 is for things that are neither urgent nor important, like mindless scrolling or just time-wasting activities.
So he's saying we should actually spend less time on the urgent stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like that's what usually screams for my attention.
Right, that's the trap. He says truly effective people, they focus on quadrant 2 activities. They're the ones that often get neglected because they don't feel urgent, but they have the biggest long-term impact on our lives.
Right. So it's preventative maintenance instead of always putting out fires.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes sense. But how do we decide what's truly important? Isn't that kind of subjective?
It is, and that's where having a clear vision, that like end in mind we talked about, comes into play. It helps you filter out those distractions and focus on what truly aligns with your values and your goals.
Okay. So these first three habits, right? The, what does he call them? The private victories. They're all about self-mastery. It's
Mm.
about getting our own act together, like internally, before we even think about interacting with others.
Yeah, you got it. It's about building that inner foundation of character, of proactivity, of purpose. Those habits set the stage for the public victories, the habits that are focused on building strong, effective relationships.
Okay, bring on those public victories.
All right.
Let's talk about how we can build better relationships using Covey's principles.
So before we jump into the specific habits, he introduces this brilliant metaphor, the emotional bank account.
Okay, I've heard of this.
Yeah, it's like a financial bank account, but instead of money, we're dealing with trust, kindness, respect.
So we make deposits when we, like, keep promises, show empathy,
Hmm.
go the extra mile for someone. And withdrawals happen when we break trust, disrespect someone, act selfishly.
You got it. And just like with a financial bank account, a healthy emotional bank account, it gives you a cushion. It gives you a reserve of goodwill. It allows relationships to thrive, even when challenges arise.
I love this metaphor because it's so relatable. I can already think of relationships where maybe I've been making too many withdrawals without even realizing it.
Yeah.
But okay, I'm ready to make some serious deposits in my relationships.
Right, let's do it.
So let's talk about those public victory habits. How do we start building win-win relationships?
Habit 4, think win-win. This one's all about seeking mutually beneficial solutions in all your interactions. It's about moving away from that zero-sum mentality, where one person's success means another person's failure.
Right. But that's easier said than done, right? Like, what about those times when you're dealing with someone who's clearly in that, win-lose mindset?
Yeah. Well, it's not about being a pushover. He actually talks about 5 dimensions of a win-win character. And it starts with integrity, sticking to your values, your commitments. Then there's maturity, finding that balance between courage and consideration.
So it's not just about being nice. It's about having the strength to stand up for yourself, but also being respectful of others.
Yeah, exactly. The third dimension is having an abundance mentality, believing there's enough success to go around, not seeing everything as competition.
Right. Because scarcity breeds fear
Right.
and competition, whereas abundance fosters, collaboration, generosity.
Yeah, exactly. Then there's the importance of strong relationships, that foundation of trust and open communication that allows you to work through disagreements constructively. And finally, it's about having clear agreements, outlining expectations and consequences, so that everyone knows what's at stake.
Hmm. So it's not just about finding a solution where everyone gets a piece of the pie. It's about approaching those interactions with integrity, maturity, and a genuine desire to create something that benefits everyone involved.
Exactly. And those dimensions of a win-win character, they actually set the stage for habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Okay, this one sounds pretty self-explanatory, but I have a feeling there's more to it than just like listening politely.
There's a huge difference between listening to reply and listening to truly understand. How many times have you been in a conversation where you're just waiting for your turn to talk, not really paying attention to what the other person is saying?
Oh, all the time. Especially if I feel like I already know the answer or I'm eager to like offer my own solution.
Yeah, that's what he calls autobiographical listening. You're filtering everything through your own experiences, your own biases, not really taking the time to see the world through the other person's eyes.
So how do we break out of that autobiographical listening trap? How do we actually seek to understand?
Well, it starts with what he calls empathic listening. And it's about putting aside your own agenda, your own need to be right, your need to be heard, and really focusing on understanding the other person's perspective, both their thoughts and their feelings.
Empathy. I feel like that word gets tossed around a lot these days, but like, how do we actually practice that in real-life conversations?
Yeah, it's about asking clarifying questions, not to challenge, not to interrogate, but just to deepen your understanding. It's about reflecting back what you've heard, both the content and the feeling, just to make sure you're on the same page. And it's about being present, giving the other person your undivided attention, not just mentally rehearsing your response.
So it's a much deeper level of listening than just waiting for your turn to speak. It's about like actively engaging with the other person, making them feel heard and understood.
Exactly. And only once you've truly understood the other person's perspective, then you can effectively communicate your own. which is that then to be understood part of the habit.
Right. I see. I'm starting to see how these habits really build on each other. It's like a progression,
Yeah,
starting with self-mastery and then moving toward those deeper, more effective interactions with others.
absolutely. And that brings us to habit 6, synergize. This one's all about creative cooperation, recognizing that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It's about those aha moments when collaboration leads to something truly innovative, truly extraordinary.
Oh, I love this idea of synergy. But how do we actually create it? It feels kind of elusive.
It's not about forcing it, it's about creating, he says, you got to create an environment of trust, of openness, of mutual respect. It requires valuing differences, being willing to challenge your own assumptions, and recognizing that everyone has something unique to contribute.
So it's not just about brainstorming or working in teams. It's about creating that culture where everyone feels safe to share their ideas, even if they're different or unconventional.
Exactly. He gives this great example of a family that's on a camping trip,
Oh, yeah.
and they're trying to decide what to do for recreation. And they're all stuck in their own preferences, but then they start to really listen to each other, to understand each other's desires, to brainstorm creative solutions.
And what happened? Did they end up, like, building a log cabin or something?
No, but they came up with this idea that combined elements of everyone's preferences, something they never would have thought of individually. And that's the magic of synergy. It's about tapping into the collective wisdom and creativity of the group to create something truly remarkable.
Okay, this is making me rethink how I approach teamwork and collaboration. But we've covered 6 habits now. What's the final piece of this effectiveness puzzle?
Well, habit 7 is sharpen the saw. This one's all about continuous renewal in all 4 dimensions of our nature: physical, spiritual, mental, and social or emotional.
Hold on, I'm starting to feel a little overwhelmed. Do we really need to, like, focus on all 4 dimensions? Can't I just, like, skip the spiritual one and focus on, like, getting more sleep and reading a few books?
Well, he uses the analogy of a lumberjack who's been sawing away at a tree for hours. He's exhausted, but he just keeps pushing himself, ignoring the fact that his saw is dull.
Right.
A bystander suggests he take a break and sharpen the saw, but the lumberjack says, I don't have time.
Right.
His point is, we often get so caught up in the busyness of life that we neglect our own well-being, and it makes it much harder to be effective in the long run.
Yeah. It's like trying to run a marathon without ever stopping to stretch or fuel up.
Right.
You might be able to push through for a while, but eventually you're going to crash.
Exactly. Sharpen the saw is about recognizing that we are our most valuable asset, and that investing in our own renewal is essential for sustained effectiveness and fulfillment.
So how do we sharpen the saw in each of those 4 dimensions? Give me some practical tips.
Okay. Well, for the physical dimension, it's about things like exercise, healthy eating, getting enough sleep, managing stress. The basics, but they're crucial.
Yeah.
For the spiritual dimension, it's not necessarily about religion. It's about connecting with something bigger than yourself, whether that's nature, art, music, meditation, spending time reflecting on your values and your purpose.
Okay. Makes sense. What about the mental dimension?
Yeah, that's about keeping your mind sharp, expanding your knowledge, challenging yourself to grow. It could be reading, learning new skills, having stimulating conversations, engaging in creative pursuits.
Okay. And finally, the social or emotional dimension. That one feels a little trickier.
He actually links that back to the public victory habits. It's about building strong relationships, communicating effectively, and creating those win-win situations.
So it's not just about self-care. It's also about investing in our relationships and practicing those interdependent skills.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of the 7 habits. They're all interconnected, building upon each other to create this holistic framework for personal and interpersonal effectiveness.
I'm starting to see the big picture now. It's not just about productivity hacks or quick fixes. It's about cultivating a certain mindset, a way of being in the world that allows us to achieve lasting success and fulfillment.
And that's why Covey's work has resonated with so many people for so long.
Yeah.
It's not just about what we do, it's about who we are. And that journey of personal growth, it never really ends.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm feeling inspired, but before we wrap up part 2, I want to touch on something he said that really resonated with me. He said, the way we see the problem is the problem. What did he mean by that?
He was highlighting the power of our paradigms, There's deep ingrained ways of thinking that shape our perception of the world. He argued that often the real problem isn't the external situation itself, but it's our interpretation of it.
So 2 people could be facing the same challenge, but their experience of it would be totally different based on their paradigms.
Precisely. And that's why he emphasizes the importance of self-awareness, examining our own beliefs and assumptions, and being willing to challenge them when they're no longer serving us.
So it's like we have the power to change our reality by changing our perception of it.
Exactly. And that's where the real transformation begins, you know? It's not about fixing external circumstances. It's about shifting our internal landscape, those paradigms that shape our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions.
Wow. Okay. This is making me rethink my whole approach to problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to see how those aha moments, those like shifts in perspective, can be just as impactful as mastering a new skill or achieving a specific goal.
Absolutely. And those paradigm shifts, those moments of insight and growth, they're what make this journey of personal development so rewarding.
Okay, my brain is officially buzzing with new ideas and insights.
Hmm.
But before we dive into even more of Covey's wisdom in part 3, I want to leave our listeners with something to ponder.
Okay, I like it. What's that?
So, remember those 4 unique human endowments we talked about?
Mm-hmm.
Self-awareness, imagination, conscience, and independent will. He says that those endowments are what set us apart from other animals, and they give us the power to choose our response to any situation, to create our own reality, and to live a life of meaning and purpose. So I challenge our listeners to reflect on those endowments. How are you using them to shape your life? Are you tapping into your full potential? And what choices can you make today to become more proactive, more intentional, and more effective in all areas of your life?
Those are powerful questions, and I think reflecting on those endowments is a great way to bridge the gap between the theoretical and the practical, between understanding Covey's principles and actually applying them to our own lives.
Exactly. Well, we'll be back soon for part 3, where we'll unpack even more of his brilliant insights and explore some of the most impactful passages from his work. And we're back for the grand finale,
The third and final part.
of our deep dive into Covey's 7 habits. I am pumped for this.
Me too.
Because we're going to be looking at some of his most impactful quotes, some of those just like really powerful statements.
Yeah, those like golden nuggets of wisdom that he just has throughout the book.
Yeah, and I was looking through these, and there's so many good ones.
Yeah.
But one that I thought we could start with that really stuck with me is he said, no one can persuade another to change.
Yeah.
Each of us guards a gate of change that can only be opened from the inside. What do you make of that?
Oh, that is so true. It's like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Right.
And it's so powerful because it reminds us that lasting change can't be forced, you know? You can't impose it on someone.
It has to come from within.
It has to come from within. It has to be a choice.
Right.
And it really highlights that idea of, you know, you can't push a rope.
Right, exactly.
You can pull it.
So it's not about lecturing people.
No.
It's not about trying to manipulate them into seeing things our way.
Exactly. Covey would say that it's about creating that environment of trust and empathy and understanding
Right.
where people feel safe to explore their own paradigms and to choose to open that gate of change themselves.
And he would argue we all have that capacity, right, for change.
Yes.
Thanks to those 4 unique human endowments we touched on earlier.
Yes.
Self-awareness, imagination, conscience, and independent will.
Let's revisit those because I think they're so important and so key to really unlocking our potential for effectiveness.
Yeah.
Self-awareness, the ability to step back and observe our own thoughts and feelings and actions, right? It's like holding up a mirror.
To our own mind.
To our own mind.
See yourself more clearly.
Exactly. And then imagination. That allows us to envision new possibilities, to break free from the constraints of our current reality.
Right. It's that spark of creativity
Yes.
that lets us dream big.
Yes. Set goals.
Imagine yourself, living a life that is truly aligned with what you want.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we got self-awareness, imagination, conscience.
That inner voice
Right.
that guides us toward what's right.
Even when it's hard.
Yes, even when it's difficult. It's like our moral compass.
Yeah, it's like that, yeah.
Reminding us of our principles.
Yeah. And that one's so important to nurture, right?
Absolutely. Covey would say it's so important to nurture your conscience, to feed it with things that uplift you, that inspire you, rather than numbing it, right?
Yeah.
With negativity or distractions.
Yeah.
And then finally, independent will. This is that power to choose to act in accordance with our values, even when we're faced with temptation or pressure.
It's the muscle, right?
Yeah.
You gotta build it up
Yeah.
to break free from old habits and create new ones.
Exactly.
And those 4 endowments, like working in sync.
Yes.
That's what allows us to like really be proactive.
Yes.
Set goals, prioritize well, build strong relationships.
That's the foundation of our freedom
Right.
and our ability to create a life of meaning and purpose.
And they're not just these like esoteric concepts. They're like
Right.
tools. Right.
Yes, they are tools.
We can actually use these
Yes.
in our lives.
Exactly.
All right, so I want to shift gears just a little bit because there was another thing in the book that was really interesting, which is he talks about this idea of primary greatness versus secondary greatness.
Yes, I love that.
So break that down for me.
All right. So primary greatness is the goodness of your character,
Okay.
right? It's who you are as a person. Secondary greatness is what you achieve.
Yeah.
So it's external validation and recognition for your talents or your possessions.
So it's like chasing fame or fortune.
Exactly.
Very
Or
good.
social status, those kind of things. And Covey says those things aren't necessarily bad,
Right.
but they shouldn't come at the expense of primary greatness.
So it's like the difference between being well-known and being a good person.
Exactly.
Okay.
And he says that real lasting fulfillment comes from cultivating that primary greatness.
It's from the inside out, right?
Yes.
Now, not the outside in.
Yes.
And there's this great quote. He says, in the last analysis, what we are communicates far more eloquently than anything we say or do.
It's so true.
So it's like walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. Our character, our true selves, they shine through regardless of our, outward accomplishments or possessions.
Right, and that's what leaves the legacy, right?
Absolutely.
Long after we're gone.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do we actually cultivate primary greatness?
Yeah.
How do we, really build that solid foundation of character?
Well, Covey would say, it starts with a commitment to the principles of the character ethic.
Okay.
And those are those timeless, universal principles, like integrity,
Yeah.
humility, fidelity, temperance.
Those things we were talking about.
All those things, yeah. Patience, industry, simplicity. And it's
Yeah.
about, internalizing these principles.
Right, not just knowing them.
Not just knowing them, but living them.
Embodying them.
Embodying them, exactly.
And I think it's also like the little things, right? It's the small choices we make.
Yes, absolutely. And that consistency
Right.
is key.
Yeah, and there's this other great quote that I love that's not from Covey, but I think it really resonates with this. It says, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit.
Oh, that's good.
It's so true.
It is.
Because it's those little things, those daily choices that build up over time.
Yes.
And I think it's also important to remember that, character development, it's a journey, not a destination.
Absolutely.
Right? We're all works in progress. And it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to, to not be perfect. What matters is that we keep learning and growing and striving to become better.
Keep sharpening the saw.
Exactly.
And speaking of sharpening the saw, we are coming to the end of our deep dive.
Yeah, sadly.
But, I think there's so much wisdom here.
That's ours to you.
And it's really just the tip of the iceberg. I highly encourage everyone to check out the book.
7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yes, because we just scratched the surface.
Yeah. Well, on that note,
Yeah.
this has been such a fascinating conversation.
I agree.
So thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive
This is my pleasure.
into the 7 habits. And to all of our listeners out there, keep striving for that primary greatness, keep sharpening the saw, and remember, you have the power within you to open that gate of change and create a life that is truly effective, fulfilling, and meaningful. Until next time, deep divers.